Okay, the next thing I want to show you is some little techniques for making really naturalistic looking shapes just using the brush. So the cool thing about Sumi brushes is they can be loaded with paint in a bunch of different ways, and they also hold a really fine point. Like, I know this looks like a big chunky thing, but the cool thing about these is that you can take your fingers and make a really fine point on the brush, and the brush will hold that point. And what I like about that point is that we can come over here and just dip into a little paint and get really thin lines. Okay, and so we're gonna practice doing a little bit of grass and some plant shapes just to kind of show you how this brush performs. Okay, and one of the things that people do all the time is they just say, I'm making grass, I'm gonna get my brush into the green, and I'm just gonna paint all the grass green. I'm gonna go like this and be like, there's grass. Okay, we know grass doesn't look like that, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use a variety of different colors. So I'm gonna get in here with analogous colors to create variety, right? So there's gonna be blue, blue-green, and green that are going to make this look more naturalistic. And then we know with grass that we can see a little bit of brown through it normally, see a little bit of the soil. And so those are the things that I use to make grass look really natural. Okay, now, this isn't the best background color for grass, but it's gonna work. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get in here with my brush and dip into my color. I'm gonna check it, and that's pretty bright. So I'm gonna keep going until it lightens up. So that's about what I want. I'm gonna take my finger and make sure I'm keeping that point. And then I start with the point away from me and move my whole arm in a straight motion. Now, grass also doesn't go all the same direction, right? So I'm gonna try and do a little bit of unevenness as I'm going, and slightly different heights, different thicknesses, and I'm just using the tip of the brush. Okay, so I'm gonna get those down on there for some grass. Now, that by itself is obviously not done yet. So I'm gonna do a couple of different layers. So I'll have some shorter grass in the front. Okay, now I need another color, right? So I'm gonna get in here into some blue-green. Sorry, just kidding, yellow-green that I'm mixing. And it's important not to use colors straight out of the pan because they look fake. So I got a little yellow and yellow-green and a little bit of like dirty bits off my palette right here, like a little bit of this orange that I had in there. And I'm gonna use that for my next layer of colors. And I'm just using the brush for this so that I can use its natural shape. And every single brush stroke doesn't have to be perfect. It actually looks more natural and organic if you have more variation. So there's my blue-green in there, and you can see that's already looking quite a bit more natural. Okay, I went and dipped back in like a couple different colors to get that going. Okay. And the more you keep your wrist still and move your whole arm, the more you're gonna get straight lines. Okay, so now I'm gonna get in here with the same brush, and I'm gonna go over and be like, all right, let's get a little blue-green. And so I'm gonna do a little mixing here, and I wanna neutralize that a little. So I'm gonna pull just some of the stuff that's on my palette into that so that it's not so bright. Add a little more green until I get something kind of natural looking. And I'm gonna check it. And I think I want more variation from that, so I'm gonna go back into just a little more blue. Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, So I'm going to form my bristles. I'm going to run that paint down so that it's not so bright. Oh, that's a heavily loaded brush. Okay, there we go. It's starting to fade. Sometimes you have to be a little patient. Okay, that's about where I want it. So now I'm going to form my brush just carefully back into the point that I need. And then I will use that to do my grass. And then the only thing missing here is a little bit of brown. So we're gonna get a little brown, same thing, mix it way down. And we don't want that bright, we want it faded. So even more than that. Okay, that's probably good. So I'm gonna shape my bristle, never twisting. And I have my fine point on my brush. And I'll just do a little. Oh, I think I faded it out too much. Actually, it's fine. Okay, and there I have my grass. Pretty little grass. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is doing some little bushes. Like, let's say I want to have part of a tree in there. I can use my brush to get a big cluster. And the first thing I'm going to do is mix my green tone. And I'm going to make sure I have enough different kind of color intensity in there so I can get my little tree mass. Okay, so let's say we're just gonna do a generic kind of tree shape right here, like, oh, there's a tree or a bush back there. And so I always kind of think of groupings of leaves as being fluffy. And so I'm gonna get that kind of fluffy shape going. And obviously the scale here compared to the grass is way off, but that's okay. So now what we're gonna do here is we're gonna get some wet to wet going. And so I have my brush. I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna just tap some other colors into it. And you could just try different things to see what looks cool. So if this is red that's being tapped into green, we know that those are complements. And so those are gonna mix together and make kind of a brown tone, okay? If we wanna imply some light on the side, we're gonna use a warmer color. So I'll get over here to some of this yellow that I have and just do a little so that it's not too much. Now, it's important to make it a little uneven because that's also going to help it look natural. Okay, and this has a lot of water going on right now. And so I can come back in and lift a little and lighten up areas. That's also going to help it look lighter. A color theory trick that I like to use with plants especially is anything that's on a brighter side is going to have the warm tones, and then the cool side is going to have, the cold side is going to have cool tones. So I'm going to go in here with a teeny bit of blue, but not so much that it looks crazy, and just gently tap little bits of blue into this to let it mix in. Right, thinking about like, oh, branches make kind of clusters, and so it's going to be naturally uneven. And so once that's dry, I could go in and paint a tree trunk on it or whatever I wanted to do. Okay, now this is a good time to talk about using the actual brush for specific types of mark making. Okay, so I have my scratch paper right here. And one of the things that I like to do is do color gradients on the brush itself. Okay, so I'm gonna scooch this paper out of the way so I can show you how to do this. And I'm going to get 2 different colors on my brush. So here's my paints. I'm going to get first some green. Okay, and the way to do that is you load the brush, you check it, and then I take the brush and I tap it with the bristles up in the air so that the color flows down towards the ferrule, this part of the brush that holds the bristles in place. So I tap, 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 tap. And a lot of times when I'm doing that, what happens is clear water will run down the handle. And so I make sure I'm not doing this near my paper. Tap, tap, tap. And then I can go in and just dip into another color. And it could be any color, but I'm just gonna do blue. Okay, and you have to tap it enough that the blue can move down and mix with the green. So you can see there's blue in the tip, green in the middle. Okay, so now I can come over here and I can use my brush to make a long, pretty mark that's gonna show those color variations. So I can go like this, right? And this is just on computer paper. And I can go back and dip in again, tap some more, and make these really pretty marks that are gonna show the color gradient, okay? And one of the ways I like to do that is I have the point of my brush and I'm making one smooth movement and I'm slightly rotating my brush as I'm doing my mark making. So heavy pressure and then light pressure and lift. And look at the pretty color variation that you can do. And so that's a brush tip gradient is what I like to call it. I don't even know if it has an official name. And so I can get some more blue on there. And this is like so pretty for making all these different effects. And so to see that again, it's just the tip touches the paper, and then as I'm making my mark, I push down more. So just the tip and then heavy pressure to let the brush touch, and then I can rotate to move the blue to make a swoosh, or I cannot rotate. But you can see the color gradient starting to get lost. So I can even go back in here and just stick the middle of my brush in the paint, leaving the tip out. That doesn't work as well, but it does work. Gets a little messy. Okay, so I have more blue in the tip, more green in the bottom. I'm gonna tap it. This one's gonna be really bright. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things you want to think about when you're doing this type of mark making is the speed that you're moving your brush. So tip down, light, heavy, and then when you lift, you have to lift slowly if you want there to not be flicks. And so I could use this to make really interesting flower shapes with sharp petals. I could do tulip leaves, long and skinny and graceful. Okay, the other thing that I can do is something called dry brushing. And dry brushing is cool if you want to make things look hairy or fluffy or whatever. Okay, so I have my brush. I'm going to keep it loaded with paint, but I'm going to blot out towards the bottom of the ferrule. And I can even take my finger and mess it up a little. And what we want to do is show that the dryness of the brush. See how you get a different edge on it? I can even take my brush and spread it out to exaggerate that even more. To do cool effects. The other thing I can do is make it actually flat and almost make a fan shape out of it and use that to create little hairy effects. You can also do a whole lot of really short grass really fast with this technique, where it's just little quick strokes. Or other cool effects. Okay, the other thing I like to do is spattering, and that's also a technique with a fairly dry brush. So I hold my fingers in like a teardrop shape and I get my brush on there. Oh, not wet enough. and I have my bristles and I just flick. Now, if I wanted to do this, I want to make sure I have control and that I'm not flicking towards anyone else's paper or anything like that. And so I will take a piece of scratch paper and use it to mask the area that I don't want spattering on. And then I can have control, do the effect that I want, and keep the masked area clean. Okay, so these are just some little fun things that you can do to experiment with this specific type of brush. So now that we have done that, I think we can pull our tape off. Also, our salt has had enough time to dissolve, so we can rub the salt off. So you don't ever want to rub the salt off until the paper's all the way dry. And so it's like, I can tell with my knuckles that it's all the way dry. And see the pretty effect that it made. That looks nice in clouds. That looks good for outer space. It's a good effect for water. Okay, you can see the alcohol dried beautifully and didn't even bleed through to the back side. That tape we can take off. Now, painter's tape works really great. Masking tape works less great, but it still works. So when you're peeling this off, you want to go slow and pull carefully and make sure that the tape is not ripping your paper. So it's a slow, steady, low angle pull. Nice generic fake cotton ball clouds. And so those are looking good. Okay. Couple little things we have left that we want to do is wet and to dry. So the things we did over here are wet and to dry, right? And so this background paint was completely dry before we did any of these other things, right? So I could come over here with this wet area or with this dry area, sorry, just kidding, and get some paint. So I'm gonna get some brown paint because I'm gonna make a super generic tree trunk. And I like to make my generic tree trunks have a gray tone to them. And so I take my brown and I will mix other things into it until I get gray. Now, be careful adding black to brown because black takes over the universe really quickly. And so just be cautious because it'll get away from you. So I'm mixing some paint and I'm going to test it. It looks really bright, but it's not actually. So when you're doing wet on dry, you want to have your paint a little more vibrant so that it shows up well. Okay, so mixing, mixing, mixing. Okay, I feel like that is the tone that I want. Maybe I'll put just a little more green into it. I want to neutralize it a little more. Okay, yeah, that's good. It needed the green. Okay. That seems too black now, so let's add a teeny bit more brown. So this is another thing. You have to be patient mixing your colors until you get the right color that you're looking for the effect. Okay, so I'm ready to work into my wet and to dry. I'm going to form my bristles into the shape I want, and I'm going to do a totally generic tree trunk here. So I'm just going to come over here and be like, there's the little Y of my tree trunk, and it's going to come down. Some big mistakes people make when they're painting trees is they make the trunk skinnier than the branches. So just watch out that you're not doing that. Tree trunks are like rivers, right? More and more rivers join together, and as they do, the trunk gets wider and bigger. Okay, so I want to get some detailed small branches. So I'm going to come out this way. So the cool thing about wet and to dry, especially if you really made sure to let it get all the way dry, is that you get these really crisp edges on things that you're painting. So they look really nice. They look the way you intend them to, and your paint stays in the area it's supposed to stay in. It does not mix excessively because it's already dry. Now, I'm painting a tree, but I'm also wanting to make sure that I have some shading in it, because this is still a cylinder. We know that from drawing cylinders, that one side needs to be darker if it's going to look three-dimensional. So I'm going to get in here with a little more brown. I'm just going to tap it down the edge just to create a bit of an effect. Okay. And so it's spreading a lot, so I'm just going to lift a little with a drier brush. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but just enough that it looks like there's some variety there. Okay, there's my tree trunk. So if I paint the leaves on it now, it'll combine more with some of the brown. If I let it dry, it will be more separate. So I think I'm going to do it while it's just a little bit damp. Okay, and look at all my gross water. So I'm going to change my water again. Everything clean so it looks nice. Okay, now since I have clean water, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get my wet into wet area wet. Okay, I want that sponge of the paper to be